Hello team, welcome to another ATPGEO Politics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. So I'm going to do a video on UK politics at the moment, and most of you will know my own political baggage and positioning. I want to talk about how I think the US has had an incredible influence on UK politics to the point where we are going down the kind of presidential election campaign route. We're going down the informational polarization route, that our information spaces are being controlled by nefarious entities such as Elon Musk and Twitter. And when you look at the rhetoric that's taking place there, it is pretty horrific, and it's polarizing us, and that is then seeping into public discourse, and it's seeping into the mainstream media as well. And that there is a definite influence. I think, Elon Musk has a lot to answer for, and I think his investment in Twitter that was seen as a very bad business decision, just looking at the thank you, nice cup of tea there. Very bad business decision from a very technical financial point of view has actually been insanely good for influencing power in the United States and indeed in Europe. And I think we have an issue. So I'm going to actually start the video on UK politics by referring to Emmanuel Macron. He's just done this pretty big speech. I would love to play the whole of it here. I think this video is a good sort of 9-10 minutes long. I'm just going to go through some of what he said here as reported, summarized here by Farouk. I think these are individual explicit comments from the speech excerpts. President Macron said, naively, we have entrusted our democratic space to social media controlled by American entrepreneurs or Chinese corporations whose interests do not align with the survival of democracy. That is a massive freaking sentence there. We've entrusted our democratic spaces to companies and individuals, entities whose interests do not align with the survival of democracy, and they are American and Chinese. And they are able to be influenced by the Russians, we can add as well, and the North Koreans and the Iranians. This is one of the most troubling aspects of modern democratic discourse, is the power that these algorithms have, and the tech broligarchs of Elon Musk, David Sachs, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, so on and so forth. And then you can add Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos in there, and I don't think they're helping one iota. We have a really problematic situation. Quote, children are exposed to harmful content, fueling mental health and behavioural crises among the youth. Public spaces encourage emotion over reason, negativity over positivity, driving extremes. Algorithms amplify this for profit. Our democracies were not designed for this. If we Europeans do not reclaim control of our democracy, in 10 years, those exploiting this infrastructure will have won. 100% agree. This is so freaking important. And I'm going to use the UK as an example of this. We will become a continent of conspiracy theorists, extremists, and noise. If we believe in democratic order, we must put science, knowledge, culture, education, and learning at the centre. We must protect our youth and regulate social media with the same standards as democratic spaces. No hidden or fake accounts, equal responsibility for published content. Otherwise, racism, anti-Semitism, and hate will triumph. Europe can rebuild a 21st century democracy, but it requires action. I have been hanging around on Twitter for the last couple of weeks in more so than usual, and I have been blown away by the vitriolic attacks on Keir Starmer, for example, on the Labour Party, from all of these different accounts. And I'm trying to work out which real human beings, which are trolls, which are bots. And this has seeped over into as I mentioned, our mainstream media, and this is a real problem. Like, Elon Musk has done absolutely nothing about fake accounts, trolls and bots. They are rife, and they are influencing our political discourse and political outcomes from elections. He's doing nothing about that because he welcomes the influence from Russia and China and Iran and North Korea, and welcomes the influence of those domestic players that are utilizing, manipulating social media to achieve their ends, because it's so much more successfully being operationalized by the far right, and the far right populists. And I I share Emmanuel Macron's concerns here. This is honestly one of the most important, because you can relate this to Ukraine as well, by the way. So as important as you think Ukraine is, and you and I no doubt are aligned on that, information is at the heart of the kinetic war. The information war is there, and that is what Russia has been peddling for 10 years. Their return on investment in the information war expenditure in terms of their expenditure has been insane. This is what we need to be worrying about hugely as Europeans, as Americans, as British, as whatever you are. The information war is not fair at the moment, and it is absolutely tilted towards polarization, extremes, and actually I would argue far-right populists. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about left-wing populism making a stand in the UK, and that's interesting, but we'll get there later. So I want to show you examples of how the UK is taking on this American way of doing things that I don't really like that much. Now, Turning Point UK was actually if I remember correctly, Turning Point UK was the original Turning Point, and Turning Point USA, Turning Point US they took Turning Point UK and took it to the US and then made it a much bigger thing. So actually, weirdly, we haven't inherited this. We haven't imported this from the US, but we kind of have. We've imported like the way they're going about things, and there's a renewed vigor for, say, Turning Point in the UK. Now, they've got the massive banner outside the BBC. Turning Point UK protests outside the BBC London headquarters in opposition to the BBC calling our funder Charlie Kirk far right. We will not be silenced, they say. Just the whole Charlie Kirk importing of all these American cultural arguments so that they're really massive in the UK, I think is a problem. We are becoming so much more Americanized in our politics and in our discourse. The idea that you outside the BBC, you've got this massive banner that says bullets will not silence us. As if the whole Charlie Kirk thing is a British thing as much as it is an American thing. And I don't think it is. We don't have the gun culture. We didn't have the political extremities taking up so much of the discourse. And now it appears we do. And so this is kind of almost a self-fulfilling prophecy here. It's really, really... I personally find this really distasteful, as in, like, this kind of approach leaves a sour taste in my mouth, the importing of American ideals. And actually, this is, as Ian Dale, who's no liberal here, he's an LBC, basically conservative commentator, saying, what on earth is happening to our country, in our country? People dressed up in quasi-black shirt style uniforms, having the gall to tell us to be moral. Just sod off, the lot of you. P.S. They're 30 years too late. The sex more or less disappeared from Soho years ago. This is astonishing. This is the King's Army in stopping traffic in Soho because of the moral degradation of Soho. Soho now is not like it used to be.
Jesus saves! Jesus saves! Jesus saves! Jesus saves! Hello! Jesus saves!
So here now we have the King's Army full of people shouting that Jesus saves. This kind of overt religiosity in the UK that we're just not used to, and I find really distasteful. Now, yes, I am an atheist philosopher, but like, I think culturally most of us in the UK would find this anathema. Now, just as a side note, this morning, one of the first videos I watched this morning was Girl Gone London, who's this young woman that's come to the UK, lives in London, and then does these kind of vlogs on the difference between, UK food and UK food and American food, and UK this and American that, and does these, quite watchable, decent enough videos on the difference between UK and the US. British banking is way easier than American banking, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this video, Brits think American Christianity is weird, here's why. was a really, really well put together video where she discusses the difference between British religiosity and American religiosity. And as I've talked to you before, you've got this weird thing where the UK is not a secular country, and yet we are culturally secular, whereas the US is a secular country, as in by the fabric, the constitution, and the way that the US governmental infrastructure is set up and separation of church and state. It is a secular country, and yet it is not culturally secular one iota. It is culturally Christian to a large degree. And she kind of looks at this and says, British people just don't like the way Americans, talk about religion, celebrate worship, and that evangelical. We don't have evangelicalism here, which is like the evangelizing side of religion and proselytizing. And yet we're starting to see that more and more in the UK, when you're seeing, Turning Point UK again here, activists from the King's Army block traffic in Soho to protest of the immoral culture in the sex district. And it's like, really, like, honestly, just shut up. Anyway, like, that again is an example, I think, of importing American religiosity and the way about going things. I think Turning Point UK is helping to spread that. And now I showed this video the other day of someone protesting digital ID on the streets in London here, I believe. No, Labour conference. So this is Merseyside. He's a Scouse. So this is protesting outside the Labour conference about digital ID. And again, religious. We saw this very much in the Unite the Kingdom protests, where two of the main speakers there, obviously Tommy Robinson himself, who's now going down this quasi-Christian pathway where he's saying he's going back to church now, and etc. And you've got this integration of the far right British traditional values as a kind of statement against, or a movement against, immigration, which is seen as largely Islamic immigration. So you've got not just anti-immigration because of the colour of people's skins, but actually because there's a cultural aspect to that as well, which is a religious aspect. So it then becomes a religious war, which is, well, most immigrants we don't like are brown-skinned Muslims, and therefore we need to stamp our own sense of British identity, put that mark in the sand, and that will be I wouldn't say Judeo-Christian, I'd say a Christian sense of Britishness. So you saw that at the Unite the Kingdom protest. And here, you've got, I know this is just an anecdote, but I find this quite reflective at the moment. I'm hearing more and more voices like this.
I'll tell you what it is. It's in Revelation 13, and it talks about in the future. John was given a vision of the future. Not John the disciple, not John the Baptist, John the disciple, yeah? He was given God showed him what was going to happen in the future, right? And he said, no man can buy or sell unless he takes the mark in his right hand or upon the forehead. Now this isn't the mark, but it's laying the foundations for it. They want everything cashless. They want everything digital, everything you do, everything you buy, everything. It's got to go through them. If you're not complying, then basically you're against the system and you'll be beheaded for it. This is what the Bible's teaching. Now people are starting to comply with what's happening. People are just walking around shopping. Of just like, town is no different to what every other day. It's like nothing's happening.
Do you think the Bible foresaw Keir Starmer and digital ID?
So on and so forth. So, again, I worry about the direction of some of our discourse at the moment. Elliot Higgins talks about reform. This is in response to Farage shows his absolute weakness as a Trump puppet. Again, Nigel Farage and reform being MAGA 2.0, British style. I think that is very overt. We're seeing basically every single Trump policy, well, every single reform policy has its roots in Trumpian republicanism, and I think that is becoming more and more obvious. Trying to bring in the Brit card, which is a response to the Britannia card, which is a response, or not a response to, it's a mirror of the American gold card, where you can just be a really rich person and pay to get citizenship in the US and now the UK. So to which Elliot Higgins, Farage shows his absolute weakness as a Trump puppet on LBC. Asked about Trump blathering about a completely unproven link between paracetamol and autism, Farage said, I have no idea, and that he would listen to RFK Jr. He went on to say science is never settled. This is dangerous. Elliot Higgins says, this is because reform relies on building a coalition of disordered counterpublics, reacting against distrusted institutions, and the anti-vax community is part of that. So as he knows he needs to keep it... he knows he needs to keep it vague to avoid upsetting them. It's really important for the media and the public to understand what's happening here, as it's the same playbook as the MAGA coalition. Find all the fringe groups who don't trust institutions for whatever reason and promise them to deliver what they want, so they build enough of a coalition to gain power. Farage's I have no idea line isn't indecision, it's a calculated vagueness. By not rejecting Trump's claim, he avoids alienating the anti-vax, anti-science bloc, while still sounding reasonable to others. This is how you hold together a coalition of distrustful counterpublics. The vagueness is a key tactic. If Farage outright rejected the anti-vax conspiracy, he'd risk losing those voters. If he embraced it, he'd alienate moderates. By staying open-minded, he signals to everyone that he's on their side. Reform relies on stitching together communities defined less by ideology than by distrust of science, government, media, climate policy, migration statistics. This is so important. And this then gets capitalized upon by those who are really well able to use social media to manipulate the discourse. It's so easy to sling mud. It's so easy to burn down than build. It's so easy to rip down trust of science, government, media, climate policy, migration statistics, and then just throw around vagueness, play fast and loose with stats, and be vague on certain statements. Vagueness allows for us to promise each group that they'll get what they want without ever resolving the contradictions. This is why reform's rhetoric feels slippery. It isn't about clear answers. It's about maintaining enough ambiguity for each counterpublic to project their own grievances onto the party. It's coalition building through disordered discourse. So next time you watch a reform leadership get asked about something, see how they react, and perhaps if you're a journalist interviewing them, call them out and don't let them wriggle out of giving a straight answer. This is why I'd like Mehdi Hassan back in the UK to start really giving people like Nigel Farage a desperately hard time. You got Liz Truss, and this is another example of taking on these American ideals and cultural talking points and embedding them in UK discourse. Liz Truss, our former Prime Minister, has gone batshit crazy recently, and she's gone completely Trump MAGA. She's gone into that whole world. She says on September the 22nd, she said, "We will never forget Charlie Kirk. Let him inspire us." As if like that should be relevant to the UK population. We had the Reform councillor storm out of a meeting in Torfan in Wales, some small town council meeting, because they refused to have a minute's silence or whatever for Charlie Kirk. And no one even knows who Charlie Kirk was, basically. But Reform are bringing that cultural, those cultural narratives and throwing, because I think that is very much embroiled in culture wars sort of stuff, the Charlie Kirk thing. Anti-woke, war on Christmas, all this kind of stuff, bringing that to the UK. I've heard my partner's father talk about, being anti-woke and ending wokeism and stuff like that. And he said, and then you question what he understands by that. And it's just a real lack of understanding, but it's taking these elements off like where he's reading his news from and the social media places he hangs out, and thinking, oh man, there's poison coming in from the United States, and I think this is a problem. Brendan May says of Liz Truss, she's gone, totally gone. Also now supporting Tommy Robinson, she should be removed from the Tory party, defect to Reform, and then be sectioned. I don't disagree. But the problem is, our mainstream media platforms, as I've said many times, are platforming Reform. Here's an example that happened in September, just after that time. Reform held a sort of policy presser, and it got Sky News and BBC to show the presser for an hour, basically an hour of non-stop showing this. And you didn't even have that at the Labour conference. You didn't even, this is absolutely unbelievable that an upstart party is receiving, like, for 56 minutes, Sky and the BBC interrupted everything else. So you got Keir Starmer announcing that Palestine is a state. All of that interrupted by a Reform UK live feed that went uninterrupted and unchallenged. The stream spluttered, froze, it pixelated dozens of times, and yet they still stuck with it for 1 whole hour, pretty much. This is an editorial choice. No other party gets this coverage. This has been going on and on now for some time, where there have been complaints. I know some of you in my threads have said I've complained to the BBC because they seem to be like asymmetrically platforming Reform. And it is not cool. And then Chris Mason, one of the BBC political editors, I think he is a BBC political editor now, watching Chris Mason on BBC News challenging Ed Davies' assertions that the BBC give Reform UK Limited, which is a private company, too much uncritical airtime. Today they aired Reform's presser for 56 minutes, had it as the main topic on Politics Live, and then ran it as a top story on a main news show. Remember, Reform have 5 MPs. Lib Dems have 72. Lib Dems, do you think the Lib Dems get 56 minutes of airtime? And so the idea, and I've had friends say this on my Facebook and whatnot, just saying, well, you know, they are reflecting the problems that the issues that the UK electorate think are there. No, there is this coextensive relationship whereby they're driving those problems because they're platformed. It's a mere exposure effect. The more you see something, the more credible it becomes and the more attractive it becomes. It's literally how advertising works. If you have Reform constantly on the news, then they become the prevailing political force because you're forcing them upon the electorate by showing them that. It is and it's not reflective of the MPs who were voted in the last election. And I think there are serious problems that are existing in our information spaces, or mainstream information spaces. And then, you know, you've got all the problems with Nigel Farage. I'm not sure what it is that Farage is banging on about, says Keith Burge. After all, there's one foreign national who came over here, so to do with elections. There's one foreign national who came over here and worked so successfully that it appears she managed to save 850,000, which she used to buy a house for her boyfriend out of the goodness of her heart. So this idea, and I've talked about this before, that Nigel Farage complained about Angela Rayner avoiding tax or evading tax, and there was all that thing. I did some videos explaining that, and then he seemed to have done arguably worse himself by evading stamp duty, which is when you buy a new house, a certain amount goes to the government, and then if you buy a second house, then even more goes. So people don't want to be seen buying second, third, fourth houses because then you have to pay more tax. So he got his girlfriend, who's French, an immigrant, coming and buying with cash a house that's £850,000 so that he doesn't have to pay as much stamp duty. And then he was like, well, she bought it out of the goodness of her heart in Clacton, in my constituency, when he said, I've got a house in Clacton. So I, and then it became we, and then it became she. So she's got this house. But if she received the money from Nigel Farage to buy that house, then that's him buying a house and avoiding paying tax on, or evading paying tax on buying that house. And so this is a big scandal. But it appears to have gone by the wayside because no one is holding Nigel Farage to account. I mean, it's interesting to note that, you know, here's one complaining about immigrants and whatnot. First wife was Irish. His second wife was German. His long-term partner is French. He worked for Russia Today. He idolizes Americans. He spent decades loving and working in the EU. You know, he was a member of European Parliament. He works for a Dubai-based company and claims an EU pension in 2 years. So, you know, these tells you he's the one telling you foreigners are bad for you. It's just absolutely incredible. So there you go. It's also Don McGowan here saying Farage is not declaring his income. Why has Farage not been declaring his private security on his register of interest? There is no declaration of a gift of a donation or donation of private security. So he was complaining that he wasn't getting security from the government. The government cut his security, and this went all around. And this is a problem with social media, is it throws out these stories, and then Nigel Farage knows how to manipulate it, and everyone's like, "This is terrible. Look how the government are unfairly discriminating against opposition politicians." So he's had his security detail cut, and it was cut because of X, Y, and Z, and that was all absolute nonsense. It was incorrectly reported, but actually, so embroiled in this whole issue is the fact that he is getting, I think, gifted security, but it's not being declared. There's no declaration of a gift or donation of private security. The article says it costs £1 million per year for his security, but nothing has been declared. MPs have 28 days in which to register any financial donations on their parliamentary register, but Farage's last entry on the register was actually back in May. So we're being led to believe that the man who earns £1 million a year from his outside work just stopped earning in May. This stinks. His most recent declaration was on 31st of May 2025 for £26,817 for 12 hours of work at GB News. That's £2,234 per hour, by the way. Man of the people, my behind. But the more pressing matter is what happened to his earnings since May. Is this hubris? Is he trying to get caught out to launch another woe is me, everyone hates me campaign? Diligent Lee Anderson, who's a Reform Member of Parliament, has declarations coming on the 8th of September like a good boy. Farage has just halted his declarations, so what are we to take from this? Unclear. But what is clear-cut is that somebody in Parliament and the media should have spotted this and be investigating its potentially very serious breach of the Code of Conduct and could and should lead to a suspension. Also, I find it strange that the Telegraph had unpaywalled this article. I assume it has been paid for by Reform. Reform blames the Home Office for cutting Farage's security. Reform UK's taxpayer-funded protection reduced before Starmer launched racism attack. And that's how it's all being framed. And anyway, you need to look into the whole finer details of that. But it has been noted that Farage has got a long and fractious relationship with being open and honest with his tax. So Nigel Farage broke electoral law over £205,000 of donations that were not declared to Electoral Watchdog. When was that? 2014. So, like, the man is not on. He, like, everyone, when I open Twitter, I am just met with a barrage of Farage, a barrage of, like, this is the leader we want. He's such a leader. He's amazing. And all these people obsequiously fawning over Nigel Farage. I'm like, the dude is just horrendous. He's morally horrendous in the amount of laws he's either broken or skirted or whatever. He's just, if this is your idea of a leader, then you need to go back to moral school. But the problem is for then Labour Labour actually, is that if they then go to town on Farage and Reform, then they're seen as gutter politics. And then if they don't go to town on Farage, then they're seen as, like, embracing the far right. And so Labour, like I keep saying, are caught between criticisms from the left saying you're not going hard enough on Reform, and then criticisms from the right saying, well, when you do go hard on Reform, it's just gutter politics. And I, as this analyst says, Starmer's not acting like a grown-up politician. He's playing by Nigel Farage's own rules. Starmer's comments on Reform UK and Farage is very gutter politics and a bit playground-esque, says the Times Radio. Okay, right-wing a news outlet, but their political editor. So, as someone said, so Starmer doesn't confront Farage, he's hiding and cowering. And if he does confront him, it's gutter politics. Can these pundits explain what Labour is meant to do then? And I really do believe that. And the way that the media just platforms Reform to outright kind of, like, this is very Americanesque. This is what we're seeing at the moment in the US with regard to political violence, right? So you've got the right, and I've got a whole video ready for this. You've got Greg Gutfeld the other day talking about political violence is terrible, it's coming from the left, and when the right do it, we own it, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, and then Jessica Tarlov says, January the 6th, like, the president literally let 1,600 violent protesters against the police off. Don't give me this nonsense about blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this idea that, oh, political violence is started from these guys and we're now all suddenly clutching our pearls because look at how horrible the left is, the Democrats are, and what they're saying. Oh, it's so horrible. And that's why everyone's shooting everyone and blah, blah, blah. And that's just abject nonsense, right? But that has been taken on by Richard Tyson Reform here. So you had what I thought was an exceptional, for Keir Starmer, speech in the Labour Party conference, and I'm no massive Starmer fan, but for him, it was well delivered and it was a well-written speech, and it really was pretty good. I did a whole video on that. And after this speech, Reform came out and said, Nigel Farage came out and said, oh, I'm afraid for my life now. I think he's starting, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like, the rhetoric is so violent from Keir Starmer. It's like, what? And then, Richard Tice saying that, well, I'm not going to play it to you, but he basically said, quote, the Prime Minister literally used the word arms, take up arms and attack, go for the enemy, just the most extraordinary language. So that's the Reform deputy leader saying that the language of Keir Starmer at this Labour Party conference was essentially violent, extraordinary language, and it was anti-reform, and now we're afraid for our lives type thing. And then people are like, but he literally didn't say that. So now we got to the situation where here, Sky News, platforming Richard Tice to basically lie to the public. Fortunately, the speech was filmed, so we know the Prime Minister did not use the word arms, nor call on anyone to take up arms and attack or go for the enemy. It's absolutely staggering. But this is the sort of stuff that we're seeing in the US at the moment, where people are able to lie so brazenly in public and not get called out for it. Trump can come onto Fox News or any news station and just outright lie, and he won't accept questions from difficult questions from journalists. They ask him a difficult question. He says, who are you from? Oh, I don't take questions from you. You're fake news. And then only gets questions from people who are going to fawn over him. We're starting to get that in the UK whereby our elected politicians from certain areas that reform, like you can bet your bottom dollar if a Labour politician said something that was somewhat dubious, they would be called out straight away and challenged on it. As soon as reform say anything, they're just not challenged. Deborah Meaden says claiming Starmer used these words was incitement itself. Oh, the irony. Ben brought, to the idea that Richard Tice is claiming that this is incitement. Reform up in arms at language that they say may incite violence against politicians. They brought onto their stage the woman who said, quote, this is what happened at the Reform Party conference, right? And this is the asymmetry that I think is existing in the United States, where the Republicans are saying these bonkers things like, the violent language from the left, when they've been doing violent language for years and years and years, and then Trump continues to do so. And at the same time saying this is the fault of the Democrats, that people are getting shot, etc., etc. And then continuing to call the Democrats like fascists and Nazis and all this. And then saying, oh, I can't believe the Democrats call us these things. Absolutely incredible. So anyway, Reform is up in arms. The language they say may incite violence against politicians. But the Reform Party conference, they brought onto a stage a woman who said, quote, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the bastards for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. And you're like, what? So we got Richard Tice and Nigel Farage both clutching their pearls over violent language from Starmer that wasn't violent language, and he didn't say that. And yet things were actually said at the Reform Party conference that were pretty damn horrific. Anyway, I find the double standards quite horrendous. Right, let's go on to talk about the Conservatives, though. And we can talk about the Labour Party as well. They're in government, but they're getting attacked left, right and centre. But, and you can say, well, correctly so, because they're not doing this well and then this kind of scandal, whatever. My position is they're fairly centrist, right? They're trying to do securonomics. They're trying to just steer the country in a centrist manner. But the whole point of this video is that social media and society at large is just, I think, polarising to the extent that you're either getting this or this as an option at the two extremes. And it's very difficult to shout for just sensible centrist politics. And at the moment, Labour are trying to navigate this very difficult pathway between these extremes, and they're losing support from the left and they're losing support from the right, and so they're left at this kind of emaciated center point whereby there are just very few people left to say, do you know what, let's just have fairly sensible politics just in the middle here, thank you very much. People are just going crazy eight bonkers over there and crazy eight bonkers over there, and you're like, come on guys. So now I've said to you many times before that the Conservatives are caught because they're traditionally centre right, so they'd be part of this kind of centrist approach. So the UK Conservatives, compared to the American scale, have always traditionally been fairly centre right. But over the last 10 years, as you've seen politics in the US go in these diverged directions, you're seeing that happen in the UK as well, where Reform have come along, and then the Conservatives had to go, right, now we've had our vote split by Reform. That's what let Labour in last time. Labour wouldn't have had such a victory if the right hadn't, for the first time in electoral history in the UK, been split. Now the left is always split at least four ways. You've got the Lib Dems, you've got Labour, you've got Greens, and you've got SNP in Scotland, Plaid Cymru in Wales, right? And in England you may have like Socialist Workers' Party and the other ones and whatever. So they're always split, the left, whereas the right has never been split apart from the last election. So now Conservatives are going, okay, how do we deal with this? Do we keep our centre-right positioning and be quite moderate, or do we fight Reform by being Reform in our own way? And it looks like, so you had this leader fight for the Conservative Party leadership between Robert Jenrick, who wanted to take the party to the right to be just like Reform, and then Kemi Badenoch, who wasn't selling it on that, but actually when you look at her rhetoric previously was pretty much aligned to Reform. So anyway, people went for Kemi Badenoch. Maybe she's a black leader, and there might be some element of that being kind of useful. I'm not to say that she didn't have her own abilities and whatnot, but I get a sense that there was a slight rejection of the Robert Jenrick take it fully into Reform territory. But then Kemi Badenoch has just said last week that Robert Jenrick is just copying her, and then so his Reform light is actually her Reform light. So she's effectively admitted to being the same as Robert Jenrick, which is the same as Reform. So it looks like the Conservative Party is just going to try and defeat Reform by being Reform or merging with the Reform. And now she's espousing Kemi Badenoch, and some people are saying she won't last long, by the way, and she's, you know, Conservatives are getting absolutely tonked in the polls and blah, 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 as are Labour, but, you know, I think even more so. She's now said that the government will take Britain out of the ECHR, which is the European Court of Human Rights.
We need to stop the boats. Today, after months of work and detailed planning, I'm announcing that the next Conservative government will take Britain out of the ECHR. This is not a decision I take lightly, but our country is our home. It's not a hotel. Nothing will stop me restoring control of our borders.
So basically, she's going to take the UK out of the European Court of Human Rights in order to be able to deport an absolute ton of people. That's essentially what's going on here. As Jessica Seymour KC says, as a top specialist in this area, I can tell you that these claims about the ECHR are incorrect. So she goes on to then talk essentially nonsense about the ECHR. Her best lawyers are wrong. She's also failed to ask a fundamental question more important than her 5 tests, the international implications, the UK of leaving the Council of Europe. So in order to leave the ECHR, you have to leave the Council of Europe, I think, and then, which is not to do with the EU, by the way. And then this is just thoroughly problematic. It will also upset the Good Friday agreements, whereby it is integral to the peace deal with Northern Ireland and Ireland, and so on and so forth. Ed David from the Lib Dems says Kemi Badenoch has chosen the side of Vladimir Putin and Nigel Farage with her plan to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. The ECHR is a proud British creation championed by Churchill that protects everyone's rights and freedoms. Kemi Badenoch has chosen to back And he continues, this will do nothing to stop the boats or fix our broken immigration system, problems caused by the last Conservative government that Badenoch still hasn't apologised for. I say to former One Nation Conservatives, so your moderate Conservatives, who have been abandoned by their party's lurch to the extremes, again talking to what I'm talking about here, you have a home with us, the Liberal Democrats, will always fight to defend our fundamental British freedoms and the rule of law. So what you might now get is the One Nation Democrats, people like Rory Stewart, who's no longer an MP, but those, if there are any of those left, they might defect to the Lib Dems, and you are going to see defectors from the Conservatives, as you've already seen with Danny Kruger, deflecting to Reform. So again, Conservative Party having to work out what it should do in order to stay as an existing and meaningful political party, as one of the oldest political parties in the world, right? So the ECHR, leaving that is a bit of an issue. Here's Euronews reporting on it.
ECHR is blocking the UK from deporting migrants. It's not entirely true.
The first reason is that the European Court of Human Rights can block deportations only under very, very specific circumstances, which is whenever someone faces a real risk of torture, inhuman or degrading treatment in a third country. The second reason, and perhaps the even more important reason why that claim is false, is that the legal principle of non-refoulement is not just based on the ECHR, it is a core principle of international law.
So, even if the UK left the ECHR, it would still be bound by other international obligations and treaties and wouldn't deal with immigration any faster. If the UK left, it would sit alongside the likes of Russia and Belarus outside the Council of Europe, which incidentally has nothing to do with the EU. So, would there be any benefit to the UK leaving?
It would be a devastating blow to the UK's reputation within Europe and beyond as a kind of, as a country that accepted basic human rights obligations. It would also cause major difficulties with the EU in relation to our Brexit deal with them, which implicitly requires us to continue to abide by the ECHR, and it would also cause problems in relation to the Good Friday Agreement.
So the audio wasn't great there, but it would cause problems with our deals, our trade deals and everything with any kind of deals, political deals we have with the EU, and cause issues with the Good Friday Agreement, peace accord up in Northern Ireland. Now, Kemi Badenoch also says that she wants to copy, again, this is going back to copying the US, and we've seen front page news on, I think, the Express or the Daily Mail talking about 150,000 deported under a new ICE proposal, as if, this is essentially what they think their readers want, and quite possibly they do, which is, I'm horrified when I look at what the US is doing with regard to how ICE is operating. I've got a whole video on some just horrific things. Maybe people don't understand how horrific the ICE activities are, but they're looking at that going, I want to get rid of 150,000 legal immigrants each year, and we're going to militarize our streets in order to do that. And that's what Kemi Badenoch is now advocating.
Today, I'm launching our Radical Borders Plan, the toughest reforms Britain has ever seen to border laws and operations. Successive governments have failed on immigration. Labour promised to smash the gangs. Instead, in just a year, they delivered record small boat crossings, over 50,000 illegal arrivals, 32,000 people in asylum hotels, billions wasted. It's pure weakness.
She said successive governments, but then just went on Labour's record and then didn't talk at all about how horrific the Conservative record was on immigration and the massive spike in coming out of Brexit and then taking non-EU immigrants, but like an absolute ton of them in year after year. And people will be should rightfully be like astonished at this rhetoric when, our present immigration problems lay very solidly at the feet of her own party. And remember, illegal immigration, if you're worried about migration as a whole, is responsible for a very small percentage of the migrants coming into our country every year. Like boat crossings are something like 4.8%. Nonetheless, this is something that Labour have to deal with because this will be absolutely weaponised by both Reform and the Conservatives. And so you will see Labour then move to the right, and this should prep us up for what the retaliation is from the from the left here. But you're definitely going to see Labour be as hard as they can get away with being on immigration, because this is a challenge. However, like what is being proposed here, well, maybe there really is just a huge appetite for this in the UK.
Britain needs a serious, credible plan and the backbone to deliver it. That's the Conservatives. That's our borders plan.
Our plan is clear and backed by expert legal analysis and serious structural reforms to deliver what the British public deserve, banning asylum claims for illegal entrants, leaving the ECHR and scrapping the Human Rights Act, creating a new removals force, removing 150,000 a year, deporting all illegal arrivals within a week, ending costly legal challenges of block removals, and getting returns agreements backed by visa sanctions, so if countries don't take back their own people who have broken our laws, no more of their nationals will be allowed to come here. Only the Conservatives have a plan to deliver stronger borders.
My message is clear. If you come here illegally, you will be deported. We'll shut down the asylum hotel racket, save billions, and take back control of Britain's borders.
Now, I mean, there are loads of issues with that, but there are also loads of things that people will be listening to that going, yeah, that sounds really good. But the devil is in the detail, right? So it's really easy when you're in opposition to say, we're going to do, and then insert bombastic claim there, because you don't really have to come up with the actual mechanisms that can achieve that. So there are loads of questions about this, and it's very easy. Like, don't get sucked in by thinking, yeah, I agree with all that. You may agree with all of that, but agreeing with that and actually being able to do that are two very, very different things. And it's worth also noting that the whole migrant hotel crisis thing was of the Conservatives' own making. Now, when I talk about, be wary of people making bombastic claims because they might not be able to back that up, this is Kemi Badenoch being asked where the 150,000 people she plans to deport each year would go.
Where would you propose that 150,000 people would go? Because the original Rwanda plan was going to take perhaps 1,000 people over 5 years.
Laura,
so where would those people all go?
Not here. Not here. They do not belong here. They are committing crimes. They are hurting people. We have been trying to deport so many people and have been facing obstacles in the legal system. That's why we're leaving the ECHR. We tried to deport a Jamaican national who had committed crimes. Shabana Mahmood and Keir Starmer wrote a letter asking us not to deport him. He went on to kill someone else later. I'm tired of us asking all of these irrelevant questions about where should they go. They will go back to where they should.
So, and all of this, that is a typical politician's answer. So blaming the present government for, I don't know, someone murdering someone, and then saying these are irrelevant questions, but they're not irrelevant questions. It's like, you can't promise to deport 150,000 people. That's an absolute ton of people. Like, you failed to get, like, what is it, any more than 7 people to Rwanda. We're talking about 150,000. And that cost, what was it, 4 people went to Rwanda, and that was like 700 million pounds, whatever the crazy amount the Rwanda scheme ended up being. And it was an absolute failure. But they would argue that it's a failure because of all the legal obstacles put in the way. But, still, I think it's an absolutely bona fide question. Like, okay, you want to deport 150,000 people, fair enough. How does that work? Like, that's a lot of people. You can't just like, yeah, she said, not in our country. Yeah, okay. Which country? Where? How? How does this work? Because otherwise you're just promising the moon and then you end up delivering not the moon.
Or another country, but they should not be here. We need to look after the people in our country.
But it's not irrelevant to say where would they go. That's a fundamentally important question.
The most relevant question is, should they be here? If they should not be here, then they need to be removed.
And
do you know how ridiculous this is? I'm sorry, Kemi Badenoch, but if I sat there and said to Laura Kuenssberg, if you vote for me, the JP party, I'm going to give everyone 2 billion quid just in cash, just 2 billion quid in cash, and about a ton of cheese. I'll give you 2 billion quid and a ton of cheese. Hopefully you like cheese because you get a lot of it. Everyone in the UK is going to get 2 billion in cash and a ton of cheese. And Laura Kuenssberg then goes, well, where are you going to get that cash from and how are you going to get the cheese? And I'm going to go, that's a relevant question. It's not a relevant question. What's important is that you get 2 billion quid in cash and a ton of cheese. That's what we need to be talking about. You can't just promise that and then say, and by the way, I don't need to tell you how it's going to work. It's absolutely irrelevant where I'm going to get 2 billion quid for each person from. It's just an irrelevant question. I do not like you asking that, Laura Kuenssberg. So Kemi Badenoch's position here, I think, is ridiculous until she can give us an idea of where 150,000 people are going to go.
Once you have
the logical
concluded
conclusion
that, you
of
have
what
to
you were saying,
say where they would
Laura,
go.
the logical conclusion of what you're saying is that let's just give up. Oh, it's just all too difficult. This is how we've got to this mess.
The logical conclusion of what you're saying, Laura Kuenssberg, is that we can't have 2 billion quid for each person, but that's ridiculous. We can, and I'm going to give it to them. Yeah, but JP, you've got to tell us like where their money is coming from. You can't just promise like the world. Yeah, I can, and I think you're just a bad human being for asking me for details.
We cannot have this attitude anymore.
Yes, we can.
That is why we have come up with a credible plan. It's not going to be easy.
It's a credible plan.
But it is.
Tell us credibly where
I've
they would go.
answered that question.
No,
they will go back.
I have.
They will go back to where they came from. That's what they need to do. We cannot have a situation where we can't deport people and say, well, we don't know where they go, so they can just stay here. That is basically inviting every single person across the world to our shores because we don't know where they would go afterwards.
So you think it
this
would
is
be
a fatalistic and defeatist attitude.
So you think,
and I will not have that. We need to have stronger borders, and the Conservative Party has come up with a plan to do that. It is not just that 150,000. It is about banning asylum claims for people who've arrived here illegally. It is about making sure that we leave the ECHR. It is about the return scheme with visa sanctions. There's so much in there. The removals force will be funded by a lot of the money which comes from closing down asylum hotels. We need to make sure that we stop spending billions on people who should not be here and spend the billions on removing them from our country.
And she did quite a good job of not allowing Laura Kuenssberg to get her point across there. But there are so many questions, like just saying we're going to deport 150,000 people, refusing to say where they're going to go, and then eventually saying, oh, they're going to go back where they came from. Like, it's like that sounds really easy, right? It sounds obvious and easy, but there needs to be detail there, and you can't attack someone for asking you for that detail. It's just, again, here's another example of how I think Badenoch is no different, or the Conservatives is no different from MAGA America nor a Reform. Kemi Badenoch, this is some months back, saying the Argentinian president Javier Milei would be a template for my government. If we got in, we want to copy what Javier Milei is doing. Of course, now the government there is in all sorts of trouble because the economy is collapsing and they're getting bailed out by the US. And the US did the same. MAGA did the same. Look how amazing Milei is. Reform did the same. Did you see that video I showed you the other day of Nigel Farage with Milei? It was horrific. And again, this is so American, which is like, oh yeah, the guy taking a chainsaw to the Argentinian government. Yeah, the Americans got him in at CPAC. He was there with his chainsaw. Then Elon Musk took over the chainsaw, and Nigel Farage was repeating the same kind of stuff. But listen, watch his face and everything here. Ugh.
Argentina's fascinating, and I think the man with the chainsaw, the funny hairstyle. I mean, look, what he is doing is amazing, and I'd love to sit here with you in 2 years' time. And we both say, "Wow, yeah, this worked." He is amazing. And I mean, this is like Thatcherism on steroids. I mean, this is incredible. Cutting and slashing public expenditure, doing all the things that he's done. I tell you what, that's leadership. Argentina's fascinating.
So there you go. You've got both, I think, the Conservatives and Reform vying for that same sort of position. You've got Labour and Lib Dem sitting in the centre. So then what's going on towards the left? Well, what's really fascinating here is that the Green Party previously, and they actually got pretty successful. They got 5 MPs in the last election, coalescing around ideas of 2 separate kind of Green Party demographics. One is kind of your urban liberal, anti-fascist, far left person, also interested in the environment, and then also your rural kind of farming communities, people interested in the environment as well, who are likely to be slightly more conservative leaning or Lib Dem leaning. And so you've had those two elements, and I'm no expert here, so I hope I'm correct in saying, but you've had those two elements feeding into the success of the Green Party so far. And then you had Green Party leaders stepping down or whatever. You had a leadership contest between Zach Polanski and the two co-leaders. And Zach Polanski absolutely trounced the other two co-leaders. And the other two co-leaders were wanting to take the Green Party in that more German Green Party direction. We'd seen the Green Party accept that NATO was the right thing to do in Ukraine and blah, blah, blah. A much more, I think, politically mature sense of, moving to the centre, maybe you could argue. But now Farage has taken this position on the right. The Green Party are now going, we need to adopt the position on the far left now, or further to the left. So we need to be the populist left antidote to the populist right reform. And you are seeing that here. And what's interesting, and I don't know how well this will go down with some of those maybe more rural Green voters, he's basically saying, well, Reform's position is anti-migrant, anti-immigration. We are going to be pro-migrant and pro-immigration. And we are going to build up a positive narrative about how immigration is integral for the success of this nation. And I think that I can understand why he's done that, but that will take the Green Party in one very, very clear direction there. Now, you've also had Jeremy Corbyn, who's a former leader of the Labour Party, who's been kind of kicked out of the Labour Party. He's too kind of left-wing and so on and so forth. Start up this new party called Your Party, with the MP Zara Sultana and some other independent MPs. They're going to start up this new party broadly around like Palestine and Israel. But there will be also a very much economic left-wing party. And they could be a real disaster for Labour, because Labour would then be split not only in all the ways I mentioned previously, but then by Your Party as well. And the left could get absolutely slaughtered in the next election, as the right is only, it depends what happens with, they merge the Conservatives and Reform, they'll just absolutely destroy the left, because the left will be split between all these different factions. But then they've had this disaster trying to start up Your Party, and it's meant that some people who had like paid money into starting up this new Your Party thing, but then it all went a bit south, said, right, sorry, actually the Green Party are now sounding much more like the kind of left-wing, firebrand left-wing that we wanted Your Party to be. And what Zach Polanski is saying is that we want the Green Party. He's then said, well, are you really interested in green politics anymore? Is it, or is this just a socialist left-wing party? He's like, well, I don't use the term socialist, but all of our, if I was to tell you that this is our policy, this is our policy, this is our policy, these are really positive policies, by the way, nationalising the rail network, for example, that kind of thing. Most people are like supportive of that. He's like, technically you might call it socialist, but there's such a horrible association with socialism that it's probably not a good word to use, so I'll just use that however he sells it. But essentially it'll be those kind of policies, but he's absolutely unashamed over it, and you might see a resurgence of the Green Party. They've taken on a load more extra not subscribers, members, just as Reform has as well. And so you got Zach Polanski saying, yeah, we're going to go further over to this left, and I am going to use social media and charisma and time. He's getting way more time on TV than any like previous Green politician. Even Caroline Lucas, who was a phenomenal politician for Brighton, she stepped down as a Green Party leader. I think she was absolutely brilliant, and every time she speaks, I'm like, she is spot on. But she's one of these kind of like, been in politics some time and has been successful for some time, and she knows her way around politics. This is a new, young, firebrand politician or leader of the Green Party who is an interesting position. Listen to what he says and how he says it.
The Prime Minister might call this an island of strangers. When Farage says jump, Labour might say how high. But the Greens will never dance to the tune of a Trump-loving, tax-avoiding, science-denying, NHS-dismantling corporate stooge. You might as well stay on your feet, because I'm going to say, we'll say it loud, we'll say it clear, migrants and refugees are welcome here!
So that's an interesting positioning where he's saying actually migrants and refugees are welcome here. We are just going to be the foil of Nigel Farage. Now, I don't know that particular message will have a huge across the spectrum attraction for a lot of the UK, because I think broadly speaking most people will say we need to be quite heavy on illegal migration, we need to control migrants, we need to control the border, whereas he's going no, it's all fine, and actually we're just going to be the antithesis to all of that. But there is definitely a demographic with which that will fall and that will be successful, and you're starting to see green now politics be talked about a lot more, and Zach Polanski was saying that, like, yeah, we can't do the green part of our politics without doing the social inequality part of our politics. So these are all combined. So he's saying, yeah, we won't be. It's not a case of like campaigning on green, but it's campaigning on the social inequality and these things that affect people's lives on a very much a daily basis, and that's your vehicle with that you can attach the green politics to, which I understand that as well. You know, it's about being clever. Like for example, he was talking about, and I found this genuinely fascinating, and I think it was with Novara Media he was talking. So Novara Media is the left-wing media organisation UK. Here, I picked this out. This came up on my feed. Mobilising Angry Britain. So it's the Greens. You've got the Angry Britain on the right, that are talking about immigration and really angry about immigration. And then you've got people really angry with the growing sense of authoritarianism or fascism or whatever they want to call this, or racism. You know, that's how this side is. You know, there's anger on this side and there's anger on this side, and Reform is mobilising on anger, and the Green Party are mobilising on anger. So don't rule out the Green Party. I'm not sure. I understand why they're making these decisions from strategic points of view. I have voted Green previously in my life. Because of my position now on foreign policy and whatnot, I don't think I would do that now. But I understand why they are positioning themselves like that, because it's kind of like we need to get into power. And on that note, Zach Polanski said to Novara Media the other day, he said, proportional representation. So they have first past the post, and it screws over the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats and all these fringe parties so much. He says we need first past the post. And that is one of the single most important things we need to do for our democracy right now. And I'm a massive advocate of first past of proportional representation. We need to get rid of first past the post. But because traditionally first past the post has benefited Conservatives, SNP weirdly, because of how Scotland is, Conservatives, SNP, and Labour. All the other parties screwed over. I don't know whether first past the post might, if Reform get to a certain tipping point, they might benefit from first past the post. But otherwise, Reform have traditionally been screwed over by first past the post. So they had 4 million votes back in, I don't know, 2016 time. And they only got one MP, and that was only because he defected. So they got 0 MPs, really, from 4 million votes. Green Party got 1 MP from 1.8 million votes, right? So first past the post screws over these parties. But Zach Polanski said, if proportional representation, we got that in, and that got us a Farage reform government, then I would not be for proportional representation. He said proportional representation is the single most important thing we need to do as a nation to improve our politics. But if that got in reform, I wouldn't go for it, even though it's that important, because it's even more important that we don't have a reform government. So it's a really interesting point there from Zach Polanski that I can understand that as one of these kind of like dilemmas, isn't it? And the sort of person he is, like, this was before, I think this was before he was elected as leader, but this is the kind of, and I don't know why, I had this ready to go for another video I was going to do on this interesting move of the Green Party. It's not necessarily to do with the headline of all of this video, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. It's just, this is someone that is not on the right, starting to understand how social media and campaigning and PR works, and this is, I saw this and thought, this is really well done.
I met a man recently, said he wanted to stand on a beach like this one with a gun and shoot the people coming across on small boats. Said it like he was just talking about the weather. The worst bit, I wasn't even that shocked, because it's this obsession that has gripped the country. The boats, the boats, the boats. Yet something doesn't add up. Our NHS is crumbling. Our wages are frozen. Our rents are obscene, and our rivers are open sewers. And all those in power can do is blame the boats. Labour repeats it like it's gospel, this idea that there's no money left, and then they stoke racist narratives about strangers destroying everything. Well, I call bullshit. Where do we draw the line? On the lies, the scapegoating, the idea that there's no money left in this country. There is plenty of money, more than ever, just not for us. Since COVID, there are more billionaires than they've ever been. And whilst their wealth doubled, ours has been stripped away. So no wonder people are angry. Because while we feel the walls are closing in, the elites, they got to work. They flooded Westminster with lobbyists. They made sure that Farage was on every TV programme going, day in, day out, telling the same lies. Because where do you think these stories come from? All this time they've been pointing at the small boats, telling us they were the people to blame. But the problem this whole time was the super rich and their yachts. People will say, what does this have to do with the Green Party? Aren't you lot all about trees and nature? Well, yes, defending nature is vital. And this is about human nature. The man who wanted to go on a beach and shoot people, he wasn't born like that. The same system that is poisoning our rivers is poisoning our minds, all of us. And we have to draw the line. We have to change the system, not just so we can survive, but so we can all thrive. That's the Green Party I want to lead. We do not have a moment to waste. Join us. Let's hold that line together.
Now, that was before I think he was leader, but it's that kind of understanding of how to campaign and how to hit home. Now, you might disagree on, policies of immigration, whatever. I'm not really interested in policy here. I'm actually more interested in how to campaign and how to get in. So this is about saying the enemies aren't the people on the boats. The enemies are the billionaires and the millionaires making money, and while everything else around us crumbles. And that is something that a lot of people would agree upon in the UK. It's reminded me of the really famous meme of Murdoch, and so Murdoch cookie meme. It's exactly what he's talking. Yeah, this one, absolute classic. Here it is. So Murdoch has a plate full of cookies here, right? And there's a worker, British worker, with a single cookie. And Murdoch is saying to the worker, "Careful, mate, that foreigner wants your cookie." So you've got this like immigrant here who's come to the country and he's going to take off the worker. Meanwhile, Rupert Murdoch has a whole plate of cookies that he has taken off, extracted out of society. Now, this is a really powerful meme, I think. In fact, it's been updated to this recently, where they've just put even more cookies in the picture. But that is exactly what Zach Polanski there was talking about, which is, they are pointing at the boat saying that's your problem, when the problem is the billionaires and the millionaires extracting from you and making the society more and more unequal. That is that meme turned into a campaign video for the Green Party saying, look, if we don't solve this, we're never going to be. And I thought that's an amazing line. Like the same thing that is poisoning our rivers is poisoning your minds. It's the same people, the Murdochs and these big corporate entities that are doing that. They are polluting. They are lobbying to cut, in America it would be to cut EPA legislation. Like they're successfully doing that. And they're the ones that are telling you that the immigrants are the problems. Now, you may disagree with saying, we need to be much more positive with immigration and whatnot. But I just find this interesting. So you're starting to see the battle lines being set up in the UK, where Reform are positioning themselves there, the Green Party there, you've got Labour and Lib Dems in the middle, and the Conservatives fighting to be either Reform or not Reform, but probably to be Reform. This is Polanski saying it again.
The whole frame of the migration crisis is a racist, fascist frame. The answer is not to blame the migrants. The answer is not to point at the small boats. The answer is to point at the private jets, the private yachts, and to multimillionaires and billionaires and say, we will fund our public services, we will build council houses, we will invest in our NHS. I think we should want a country that people want to live here. The legitimate question is are you going to pay money in tax? Are you going to work hard? Are you going to contribute to this country? And the answer, extraordinarily so, when you look at data, is migrants are so much more likely to put money into our taxation system than they ever are to take out in social security and welfare. And just the final thing is we have an ageing population. We have masses of vacancies in the NHS. Sure, we need to train British people or people who are born in Britain for those jobs. But also, what is wrong with a migrant running our public services or contributing to this country?
Those 50,000 people that have come over in small boats over the last year, provided that they went through a safe and legal route you're happy with, or if they're economic migrants, we're happy to pay tax, you're more than happy with those 50,000 coming to the UK and becoming a citizen here.
With the caveats you gave, I think anyone would be foolish to give any other answer than welcome to this country.
I don't know how easy he's going to find to sell that, though. Anyway, off that, we're going to go just very briefly to look at what our media is doing to kind of go to town on, again, the centre here. I've never heard so much shite in one headline. Woke police chiefs and left-wing politicians. What the F are they in this piece of effing S country? Where the F are they? You spent so long down your racist nan's Facebook rabbit hole that you've boiled your effing brains to jam. I just quite like that. Anyway, the Daily Mail here. This is their literal headline from Friday, the October the 3rd. From woke police chiefs to left-wing politicians, the list of the killers' enablers is legion. So we've just had a stabbing incident in a synagogue where they've taken this out on the Labour government, on Keir Starmer. He's stated that Palestine is now a nation. Of course, his wife is Jewish. His kids are, I don't know if they're culturally Jewish or whatnot. And he's being blamed for a stabbing in a synagogue. And it's just any opportunity to attack in these ridiculous ways, and have this as a headline. From woke police chiefs to left-wing politicians, the list of the killers enablers is legion. They should have blood on their consciences. Horror at the synagogue. Just honestly, it's just nuts. Anyway, finally, Nigel Farage has been pulled up by Daily Telegraph. There have been so the media's been silent effectively in the UK on Nigel Farage and his connections to Russia, and Nathan Gill being done for bribery. Finally, there is at least an article. Leader of Reform has a long history of being swayed by Putin's propaganda. So that is welcome from the Daily Telegraph, but still people calling out for there to be a much bigger, I think, critical analysis of Nigel Farage, his money, his influence, and his connections to Russia. It still is largely absent from our mainstream media, and he is getting away with it. Now, on this kind of note, it's Sunday, the day that big political stories are often broken, and that allowed this week's narratives to be set. Two massive stories about Reform and Nigel Farage have hit the news this week. The main one, of course, is that one of Farage's very best mates, stretching back to their days in UKIP, Nathan Gill, has admitted to taking bribes from Russia. Russian cash was being sent to Reform. Hello, is anybody out there? It's incredible to me that the only people following this up properly are the Byline Times, the small media outlets that actually Caleb Robinson is a part of as well. Secondly, Farage is lying about his money again. As the Observer shrewdly points out today, he hasn't declared any incoming since April. And I talked about that earlier. In case you missed it, the Observer ran an exclusive about the story yesterday, 3 days after I broke it. So that's interesting. So what has the Mail done? The Daily Mail made up some more nonsense about Angela Rayner, the former deputy leader of the Labour Party and the deputy prime minister. If anyone can tell me, and I do mean anyone, why the Russia story is not front page news, I'll buy you a pint, coffee, milkshake, tea, because I can't make it make sense. It also explains why the usually ubiquitous presence of Reform and their human shields are not available for this week's politics shows. Funny that, isn't it? Have a great Sunday. I'm off to scream into the airing cupboard. So here's your front page news from the Daily Mail, which he's put over deflection zone below. More Labour sleaze. Weeks after she's quit in disgrace, we reveal how former Deputy Prime Minister's boyfriend is ferried around by taxpayer-funded bodyguards in an £80,000 BMW, also paid for by you. Rayner is taking us for a ride. Massive front page thing there, but nothing on, and there has been nothing from the Daily Mail, Daily Express on Reform and their connections to Russia, which is treachery. I mean, that is someone being a traitor to the country, and yet nothing. And so to link this back to the whole American thing, I think our news media is just becoming Fox News. So we've had GB News, which is literally word for word like Fox News in the UK, and is a platform for Nigel Farage in the same way that Fox is a platform for Donald Trump. You have Talk TV in the UK, you have Sky News and BBC being impotent and not saying anything critical of Reform and not holding them to account. And you're starting to get this polarised media landscape that is reflecting a polarised information landscape in the social media spaces. And it's looking like, you are having a situation whereby, like in the United States with Donald Trump saying what he likes and getting away with saying what he likes, you're having that in the UK. But if, someone from Labour said stuff, they're like completely critically taken to pieces, and someone from Reform says stuff and they're allowed to get away with it much more, I think, easily. And we get back to this conversation I've had many times, which is, these people are one-trick ponies in terms of immigration, but can they actually run councils? Can they run a country? And do they lie to you? Like I was saying earlier, they're not being called out for their lies. Well, Reform lied its way to take control of Durham County Council by saying it will reduce council tax. So that's your local tax that you have to pay to keep your bins getting emptied and whatnot. Now it is forcing 30,000 of the poorest people in the country to pay council tax for the first time. Poor people vote Reform, become poorer. And so he's gone back and apparently council tax is being raised. Evidence it was agreed last week. Durham council tax plan changes to affect 4 towns the most, so on and so forth. So, just be warned. I think these guys are charlatans. Please bring us back to sensible centrist politics. At the moment, we're going to the crazy extremes. You can see the Green Party adopting that now, and then Reform here. So it's all about immigration. Immigration is defining those two extremes in the debate. Either we're definitely anti-immigrant and we're definitely pro-immigrant. Those are the two extremes, and then everyone else in the centre trying to work out, well, actually, what do most people in the centre think, and then actually drifting towards Reform, and then Reform and the far right on immigration are dictating politics, and no one's talking about anything else. And Labour have actually had some success in other places. NHS waiting lists have come down and so on and so forth. There are a bunch of successes, but they can't talk about that because they've got no platform, because all of the mainstream newspapers are pro-Reform, bar The Guardian, and they're not particularly huge at all. Mirror to some extent, but otherwise everyone else is pro-conservative or Reform, and so there's no communication of the successes here. Labour don't know how to communicate very well. Take a leaf out of Jack Palahniuk's book or Reform's book. These guys know how to how to message well, but then they do that by blaming. So these guys will blame billionaires and millionaires, and these guys will blame immigrants. You know, it's much easier to gain popularity when you can blame other people. So I don't know. I find it's a very interesting dynamic going on in UK politics, where we are adopting loads of American mechanisms and characteristics in terms of political discourse, which I don't like, and we are definitely diverging and moving to extremes. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care. That's my big Sunday analysis. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.